Sergeant Daniel Reeve had endured pain before: broken ribs, bullet wounds, the suffocating grip of drowning. But nothing compared to this. He was strapped to a cold slab of alien metal, his arms and legs bound with restraints that bit into his flesh. The air smelled of burnt ozone and blood, and the walls pulsed with an eerie blue glow, as if the room itself was alive. A sharp, rhythmic hum vibrated through the chamber, drilling into his skull. A Zyrrathian Inquisitor stood before him, tall, exoskeletal, eyes like molten silver. Inquisitor Velix examined Daniel with detached curiosity, as if studying a strange, malfunctioning machine. "You humans are resistant," Velix mused, his voice layered with a chitinous rasp. "Primitive, fragile, but stubborn. It is inefficient." Daniel swallowed the coppery taste of his own blood and grinned through split lips. "Yeah? You should see us on a good day." Velix tilted his head, intrigued by the defiance. He gestured to a device suspended in the air, a shifting lattice of violet energy. It pulsed in response to his command. "Neural flame," Velix said. "It will not harm your body, only your mind. Every nerve, every memory of pain you have ever felt, amplified, made fresh." His mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "You will tell me everything." Daniel exhaled slowly. He'd been trained for torture. He knew how to compartmentalize pain, how to hold out. But this was something else. The device activated. Every nerve in his body ignited, a symphony of agony beyond comprehension. His mind was dragged backward through every wound he had ever suffered, each one torn open anew. The sensation of bullets ripping into his flesh, the searing heat of fire licking his skin, the bone-snapping impact of a fall, all at once, endlessly looping, magnified. He clenched his jaw until his teeth cracked, but the scream still ripped from his throat. "Your forces," Velix said, unmoved by the suffering. "Deployment strength, command structure, locations." Daniel gasped, forcing words through gritted teeth. "Go to hell." Velix sighed and increased the intensity. The walls of the room warped, flickering between reality and madness. Daniel saw things that weren't there, phantoms of his past, echoes of pain so real he could feel the blood dripping. Minutes stretched into eternity. His body convulsed, his vision blurred. Somewhere in the haze of torment, he heard Velix's voice again. "You are breaking." Daniel's head lolled to the side. His breath was shallow, his heart hammering erratically. He had no idea how long he'd been here. Hours, days. His body couldn't last much longer. Velix leaned closer. "Tell me what I need to know, and I will make it stop." Daniel forced his gaze to meet the Inquisitor's. His lips barely moved, but the words came out clear. "You should have finished the job." Then his heart stopped. Alarms shrieked. Monitors flared red. A Zyrrathian medic rushed forward, scanning him. Life functions terminated. Velix exhaled through his mandibles, irritated. "Dispose of him." Two guards unshackled Daniel's lifeless body and hauled him away, dragging him down a corridor of sterile white walls. They didn't bother with ceremony. Humans were disposable, an inferior species not worthy of further thought. The doors hissed open, revealing the bleak expanse of Tartarus. 9. A prison world carved from lifeless rock, where the Zyrrathians discarded their enemies. The planet's sky was a swirling maelstrom of ash and lightning, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. The guards tossed Daniel's corpse onto a mass grave. Dozens of bodies, human, alien, unrecognizable, lay in various stages of decomposition. The Zyrrathians rarely buried their dead. Death, to them, was final. There was no point in tending to what was gone. The guards turned away, their duty done. The storm rumbled overhead. Then, somewhere in the depths of the grave, something stirred. It was subtle at first, a twitch of fingers, the faintest shift of a chest that should no longer rise and fall. Daniel's eyes snapped open. He gasped in a breath that wasn't his own, his lungs burning with new life. His vision was wrong, too sharp, too clear. He could feel every grain of sand beneath him, every movement of the storm above. He sat up. His body should have been broken, his heart stilled. But he was whole. No, more than whole. Something was different. Daniel lifted a hand, flexing his fingers. Strength coiled beneath his skin, unnatural and humming. He could hear the crackle of the Zyrrathian energy grids miles away. He could taste the electric charge in the air. Memories flooded back, not just his own. He had died. He was sure of it. But something had pulled him back. Something old, something that had been buried deep beneath this cursed world, waiting for the right moment. The Zyrrathians had thrown him away like refuse, believing him dead. They had made a mistake. Daniel stood. The storm held around him. His lips curled into a slow, feral smile. 40 minutes ago, they had killed him. Now he was coming back. The storm raged across Tartarus. 9. Lightning ripping through the sky like jagged scars. Daniel Reeve moved through the wasteland with a silence unnatural for a man his size. Every step felt different, lighter, faster, stronger. He should have been dead. He was dead. But now, something new coursed through his veins. His mind was sharper. His senses stretched beyond their limits. He could hear the distant hum of Zyrrathian patrol drones, the crunch of boots on gravel, the shifting of metal far beyond his line of sight. It wasn't just hearing. He felt them, like ripples in a vast ocean where he was suddenly the apex predator. His fingers curled into fists. The Zyrrathians had broken him, tortured him, discarded him like trash. And now they thought they had won. That mistake would cost them everything. A squad of 4 Zyrrathian sentries patrolled the perimeter of the burial site, their armor shimmering beneath the flashes of lightning. Their elongated bodies moved with a rigid precision, their insectoid limbs perfectly synchronized. To them, this world was just another outpost, another mark of their empire's dominance. Daniel watched them from the shadows of a crumbling ridge, his body pressed against the jagged stone. He could feel their presence in a way that went beyond sight. It was as if the storm itself whispered their movements to him. Then he moved. One of the sentries barely registered the blur before something crashed into it with bone-shattering force. A human? No, something more. Daniel slammed the alien into the ground so hard, its exoskeleton cracked like dry wood. Before it could react, he twisted its head sharply to the side. The sickening snap was lost in the storm. The others turned, weapons raised. Daniel launched forward, faster than thought, faster than human. A plasma bolt seared past his cheek, close enough to burn skin, but he was already in motion. He ducked low, closing the distance before the shooter could fire again. His fist struck its chest, an explosion of force that sent the Zyrrathian flying backward, skidding across the ground in a heap of shattered limbs. The third managed to squeeze off a shot, the bolt striking Daniel's shoulder. The pain should have been overwhelming. Instead, it was nothing more than a flicker, a distant sensation that barely slowed him. He reached forward, grabbed the rifle, and tore it from the alien's hands before driving his knee into its gut. The Zyrrathian crumpled, choking on its own internal fluids. The last one turned to flee. Daniel didn't let it. He closed the distance in a blink, wrapping an arm around its throat and whispering into its ear. "Where's Velix?" The sentry trembled, mandibles clicking frantically. He left for the citadel. Daniel tightened his grip. How many guards? Dozens, impenetrable. You can't. Daniel twisted. The body fell limp. He exhaled, standing amidst the carnage, heart hammering with something primal, something hungry. The citadel. That was where Velix was. That was where Daniel would go. The prison's dropships were stationed a mile east, their sleek black frames hidden within a fortified outpost. Getting in was suicide. For a man. But Daniel wasn't just a man anymore. He sprinted through the storm, the wind roaring past him. His muscles burned, not with exhaustion, but with raw, surging power. His wounds were already closing. The Zyrrathians had done something to him. Their machines had broken his body and rebuilt it into something they didn't understand. By the time he reached the outpost perimeter, 2 guards were already standing at the entrance. One raised a weapon, the other reached for a communicator. Daniel didn't give them a chance. He was inside before they could process what was happening. His first strike shattered armor, his second crushed bone. The remaining guard screamed, until Daniel silenced him with a single precise twist of the neck. He moved deeper into the compound, weaving through corridors lined with glowing alien script. The dropships were docked in the hangar ahead, but he needed a way in without triggering the security grid. A shadow shifted to his right. A Zyrrathian officer, higher rank, heavier armor. The alien spotted Daniel too late. He lunged, grabbing the officer's wrist before it could activate an alarm. With terrifying ease, Daniel slammed it against the bulkhead, pressing his forearm against its throat. "I need clearance," he said, voice calm, lethal. The officer's silver eyes flared with defiance. "You are an anomaly, an aberration. You should not exist." Daniel grinned. "Yeah, well, I do. And I'm pissed." With a brutal efficiency, he stripped the clearance band from the officer's wrist and shoved its limp body into the shadows. The security system recognized the stolen credentials, and the doors hissed open. Inside, the dropship loomed before him, its engines idle, cockpit glowing with Zyrrathian symbols. Daniel climbed aboard, hands moving over the controls instinctively. His mind processed the alien systems with unnatural ease, another side effect of whatever had happened to him. He could feel the ship like an extension of his own body. The engines roared to life. Alarms blared across the compound. Red warning lights flashed, the sound of boots hammering against metal as Zyrrathians rushed toward the hangar. Daniel's fingers tightened around the controls. He looked toward the storm, toward the looming citadel in the distance. Felix thought he had won. Daniel would show him just how wrong he was. The citadel loomed like a monolith of death, a fortress of blackened metal and pulsing crimson lights. Towering spires stabbed into the storm-ridden sky, their surfaces slick with alien glyphs that pulsed like veins feeding a mechanical beast. Lightning arced above it, illuminating the jagged defenses that surrounded its perimeter. Ion turrets, kinetic barriers, and legions of Zyrrathian enforcers standing at the ready. It was designed to be impenetrable, a place where hope was crushed, where screams were swallowed by the abyss. Daniel Reeve didn't care. The stolen dropship plummeted through the storm, cutting through the howling winds like a blade. Alarms shrieked across the citadel's comms as Zyrrathian spotters scrambled to track his descent. He could hear their panic chatter over the ship's intercepted transmissions. Unauthorized vessel, trajectory inbound. Deploy interceptors. Do not let it breach the airspace. Too late. Daniel's hands blurred over the controls, twisting the dropship into a spiraling freefall. Plasma bolts streaked past him as anti-air defenses roared to life, painting the sky with columns of burning energy. He weaved through them, guiding the vessel with an instinct that shouldn't have been possible. The Zyrrathians had enhanced him, rebuilt him with their unholy science, and now their own designs were betraying them. The citadel's main spire rushed toward him. Daniel didn't slow down. At the last second, he yanked the controls, sending the ship into a brutal, twisting maneuver. It sheared through the outer defense grid, slicing into the upper docking bay in a maelstrom of fire and shattered metal. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the structure as alarms screamed across the citadel. Daniel was already moving. The ship's hatch exploded outward, torn free by sheer force as he leapt into the fray. Zyrrathian guards flooded the bay, weapons raised, mandibles clicking in alarm. He hit the ground running, his movements a blur of speed and calculated violence. A plasma bolt streaked toward him. He twisted, letting it scourge past his ribs, and drove his knee into the nearest alien's thorax. The Zyrrathian collapsed with a strangled hiss, its exoskeleton crushed inward. The second raised a blade. Daniel caught the downward strike midair. His fingers closed around the Zyrrathian's wrist like a vice, and with a brutal wrench, he tore the limb clean from its socket. The alien screamed, a wet, bubbling sound, before Daniel ended it with a sharp elbow to the skull. The others hesitated. They had never seen anything like this. A human who moved like a specter, who shrugged off wounds, who tore through their ranks like a force of nature. Daniel used their hesitation. He grabbed a fallen rifle, turned, and fired in a single fluid motion. The Zyrrathian at the far end of the bay staggered backward, its skull disintegrating under the impact. The others scrambled for cover, barking frantic orders into their comms. The human, he's not normal, Daniel didn't let them finish. He surged forward, closing the gap in seconds. Gunfire, bone-shattering strikes, the wet crunch of exoskeletons breaking apart beneath his fists. Then silence. The bay was a slaughterhouse. Bodies littered the floor, black Zyrrathian blood pooling in thick, smoking rivers. Daniel stood in the center of it, breathing hard but unshaken. His wounds were already closing, his body adjusting, adapting. He turned toward the corridor, leading deeper into the citadel. Felix was here, the Zyrrathian general, the architect of Daniel's torment, the one who had ordered his execution, the one who had watched, emotionless, as Daniel had died screaming. Daniel flexed his fingers. A new kind of hunger burned inside him. He moved. The corridors were a maze of shifting walls and alien technology, an ever-shifting labyrinth designed to confound intruders. But Daniel's mind saw through it, processing patterns, reading energy signatures. He knew where to go, as if the citadel itself had become a part of him. Guards tried to intercept him. They failed. He tore through them with mechanical precision, his movements an elegant storm of violence. Bullets, blades, broken bodies. He never stopped moving, never hesitated, until he reached the reinforced doors at the citadel's core. Beyond them, Felix. The air vibrated with power. The doors were sealed by biometric locks, coded only to the highest-ranking Zyrrathians. Impossible to breach, unless you had a key. Daniel turned to the dying officer twitching at his feet. He reached down, gripping the Zyrrathian's still warm arm, and pressed its hand against the scanner. The door hissed open. Beyond it lay a vast chamber, bathed in cold, unnatural light. At its center stood Felix, tall, imposing, clad in the intricate armor of a Zyrrathian warlord, a commander who had never lost. Until now. Daniel stepped inside, the door sealed behind him. Felix stood motionless in the center of the chamber, his obsidian armor gleaming beneath the eerie blue lights. His four crimson eyes studied Daniel with something between fascination and unease. The Zyrrathian general had overseen the deaths of thousands, crushed entire resistance forces with surgical precision. He had executed Daniel personally, watched his body burn, ensured that every trace of his existence was erased from the Citadel's archives. And yet, here the human stood alive, changed. This is impossible. Felix's voice was a low, resonant hum, laced with synthetic undertones. His claws flexed as he took a slow step forward, posture deceptively calm. You were erased. Your organic matter was incinerated down to the molecular level. Daniel didn't respond. He simply stepped forward, his boots crushing the broken remnants of the door's security mechanisms. His presence was an anomaly, something beyond logic, beyond the constraints of biology or physics. His heartbeat was slow, methodical, his breathing steady, his mind sharpened into something inhuman. Felix's mandibles tightened. He had fought warriors from countless worlds, unstoppable brutes, master tacticians, assassins bred from infancy to kill without hesitation. But nothing felt like this. Nothing radiated this kind of hunger, this quiet, methodical inevitability. Daniel had not come for a battle. He had come to end something. Felix activated his wrist blade in one fluid motion, the weapon humming to life with a crackle of void energy. "You are an aberration," he stated, almost regretfully. "I will correct this." Daniel was already moving. Felix slashed, the energy blade cutting through the air in a blur, aimed for Daniel's throat. The strike was perfect, precise, calculated, inevitable. Daniel tilted his head an inch to the side, and the blade carved through empty space. Felix reacted instantly, twisting his body to bring the blade back around in a reverse arc. But Daniel was already inside his guard. A fist slammed into the Zyrrathian's ribs, cracking armor, sending Felix staggering backward. He recovered fast, faster than any being his size had a right to, but Daniel was faster. Much faster. Felix lunged, his other hand forming a plasma lance. He drove it forward, aiming to impale Daniel through the chest. Daniel caught it with his bare hand. There was no burn, no recoil. The plasma hissed and crackled, but his flesh did not yield. His fingers closed around the weapon, and with a sickening twist, he snapped it off at the base. For the first time in his long, blood-stained life, Felix hesitated. Daniel struck. His movements were brutal, devoid of wasted effort. He slammed an elbow into Felix's throat, crushed his knee into the warlord's chest plate, drove his fist into the Zyrrathian's jaw with a force that sent shockwaves through the chamber. The walls shuddered. Lights flickered. Felix staggered back, coughing up dark ichor, his mandibles trembling. His mind raced, processing battle scenarios, formulating countermeasures, but none of them mattered. Daniel wasn't fighting like a man. He was consuming. Felix roared, his body crackling with stored kinetic energy. He detonated it outward in a shockwave meant to obliterate anything in its radius. Daniel walked through it. The force tore through his clothing, burned away the last remnants of his old self, but his body held. His form wavered like a specter, then solidified, more real than the air around him. Felix faltered. The general of the Zyrrathian High Command, the unbroken tyrant of war, felt something he had never once experienced in all his conquests. Terror. Daniel grabbed him by the throat. Felix struggled, clawed at the human's wrist, but the grip was unyielding, an iron vice backed by something far beyond strength. "This isn't possible," Felix rasped, his 4 eyes flickering with confusion. "What are you?" Daniel leaned in. His voice was a whisper of finality. "You made me." Then he crushed Felix's throat. The Zyrrathian general convulsed, his armored form spasming as the bones and carapace of his neck collapsed inwards. The glow in his eyes flickered, then went dark. Daniel let the body fall. Silence settled over the chamber. The citadel trembled as if sensing the loss of its master. Alarms warbled, lights dimmed, and across the station, Zyrrathian forces felt a chilling, nameless certainty sink into their bones. Their warlord was dead. Their fortress was compromised, and something had come back from death to do it. Daniel turned. He could feel it now. The changes in him, the whispers of something deeper, something unfinished. He wasn't just a man anymore. He wasn't done. As he walked toward the exit, the shadows stretched toward him, as if the universe itself was acknowledging what had been born in that room. Daniel stepped into the darkness, and it welcomed him home.